How's it going? It's Kyle with Dirt Bike Channel, and multiple times per week I have phone calls with people trying to advise them on what bike is a good bike to buy as your first bike. And a lot of times when people are getting into the enduro and off-road space, they're looking at a KTM versus a Yamaha or versus a Honda or something else like that. And I want to compare two bikes that are very, very closely related. It's the KTM 250X CW to the Yamaha YZ250X, because these bikes are in basically the same class, and they're often two bikes that people are choosing between. I wish I had a YZ250X to show here. I've had a couple of them in the past and I've ridden a bunch of them, and it is a really, really good option, and it's a much more budget-friendly option, as we'll get into. But there are some key differences on these bikes, and I hope that this information is helpful to you in deciding what you should get. By the way, I'm giving this bike away. It's a 2022 KTM 250X CW. I've made it better than new, and if you click the link right down here, go to my website, dirtbikechannel.com, you can get entered to win this bike. There's only a few more days left in this sweepstakes, and I'm doubling all entries on all orders to win this bike. So it's pretty sick. We did a bunch of stuff to it, and but I'll get to the video now. So let's talk about the key differences, because both of these bikes are going to be 252 stroke motors. Let's start with the Yamaha. The YZ250X is basically a slightly detuned with a little bit less compression version of their YZ250 motocross bike that they've been doing forever. Now these YZ250Xs are essentially a 2006 YZ250 that just has minor adjustments to it over the last 2 decades. The good news is it's tried and true. There's a million aftermarket parts for it, and it makes good power. But the KTM motor is also a 250, and now in these newer models, the last 5 or 6 years, they're fuel injected. That Yamaha motor is very simple and very light, and it is carbureted. Carburetors are great, but you have to be able to tune that thing for your altitude and for your temperature. Whereas on the KTM 250 XCWs, if it's one since about 2018 to now, it's going to be fuel injected. They have TPI transfer port injection and throttle body fuel injection, but both of them make the bikes run about 95% as good as it ever will, with almost no tuning required, versus your Yamaha, which you're going to have to be able to figure out how to tune your carburetor to get the same performance out of that. Hey guys, super quick, I'm giving this dirt bike away, and there's only a few more days in this sweepstakes, so go to dirtbikechannel.com and get entered to win that bike, because I'm doubling all the entries to win that motorcycle right now, but this thing ends in only just a couple of days. Click the link here or go to my website and get yourself entered to win this bike and the $7,000 in cash. I'll have 11 winners. Okay, go. Let's talk about the transmission and gearing. So I'll start with the KTM. The KTM has a 6-speed wide ratio transmission. The first gear and second gear are pretty low, and then there's a little bit bigger gap to third gear, and it has up to 6 speeds. And so it makes some of the single track stuff and some of the off-road stuff really, really easy to do. And then you can get out there and go faster, 60, 70 miles an hour and not be completely tapped out on this bike because of that transmission. On the YZ250X, it's still just a 5-speed motocross gearbox, and then they put some weird spacing in the gears that I think are kind of interesting. I didn't like the spacing that they did. I wish they would have just put their WR transmission in those bikes, but that is a 6-speed. But the YZ250X only has that 5-speed, and it's kind of weird spacing, so it's not as good for transitioning between trails and things. So I prefer the KTM on that one, but the YZ250X still will work with the transmission. Let's talk a little bit about suspension and chassis. On the KTM, it's a steel frame, and they're continually updating these things. Some of the frames I like better than others, and then they have a WP suspension. Now I want to talk generally, because this is a 2022 model. It's an open cartridge fork. Some of the KTMs, like the 24s and 25s and 26s, have fantastic front forks, which I think are the best in the industry. But all the XCWs come with this PDS style rear shock, where the shock hooks on the top of the swing arm. That's an advantage in some of the really technical stuff, where you don't catch it on rocks and roots because it's not hanging down below the swing arm there. You contrast that with the Yamaha, and it has the Kayaba SSS forks, the KYB forks, which a ton of people love, and then the KYB shock. I think those things are valved a little bit too stiff, even for off-road, for most riders, certainly me. Now you can always get your suspension revalved, and so a lot of guys love the Yamaha just because it has that Kayaba suspension, the KYB forks and the KYB shock. But these things can always be revalved. I do prefer the lighter valving or the softer valving on the KTMs generally over the Yamaha, but there's a ton of people who would disagree with me on that. So I think that the frames on the XCWs generally turn a little bit tighter. I think they're generally more nimble, because if you remember, that frame on the YZ was for motocross, and that was what it was designed for, and it was never really changed to do any of the off-road stuff, where this bike, these XCW bikes were kind of designed more for off-road and single track and hard enduro stuff. So I think I give the edge to the frames on the KTMs and the suspension just because it's softer. Let's talk about weight. They're actually pretty close in weight, but the YZ250X is gonna be a little bit lighter. We're talking a few pounds, you know, maybe 5 to 6 pounds. Depending on which model year. And so because the KTMs have varied in weight because of the different components that they have on it, but keep in mind that KTM is a little bit, weighs a little bit more because it has more fuel, it has electric start, and in most of the cases, it's gonna have electronic fuel injection. So it's carrying a battery, it's carrying a starter, it's carrying more fuel, and it's carrying an extra gear in that gearbox. So that's why it's a little bit heavier, but I have never felt that weight when I've been riding the two. I feel like the Yamaha feels really light and the KTMs feel really light. If I was to say which one feels a touch lighter, I think probably the Yamaha does feel a touch lighter, but I'm missing that electric start. And it isn't for me, it isn't quite as agile in turning. So the Yamaha's more of a go fast bike. I think if you're in third gear and fourth gear, that Yamaha makes a ton of sense. Whereas if you're in first gear and second gear, the KTMs will make a little bit more sense. And that's where I feel kind of the weight differences really come into play. Let's talk about how they start. I've already kind of alluded to that. But the KTMs are gonna have electric start. And some of the KTMs in different years will have kick starts and an electric start. The Yamaha YZ250X is only going to be kickstart. Now, I know they're not typically that hard to kickstart, but I will, and some of you guys are like, oh, you don't need a Kickstarter on a two-stroke. My response to that is once you've had it, you don't want to go without an electric start, especially if you have to stop and start the bike on a hill climb or on an off-camber hill or just in places where you can't really get your foot down. Every time you have to kickstart the bike, it takes a little bit more of your energy out of you. And when you're spending that energy kicking the bike, it does take away from the overall ride, especially if these rides are long. Now, if you're just riding in the backyard and you really never stall the bike, it's not a big deal. But the more you stall the bike or the more technical situations you get in, the more you end up using that electric start. And that's a big value. Now, they do have some aftermarket kits for those Yamahas where you can put aftermarket electric start on the things, but it's like between, it's over $1,000, I think. And then it's just kind of Frankenstein on the side of the bike. I don't love it, but you can do that. So it's an extra cost. So some of the money that you'd be saving with that Yamaha is going to be eaten up if you put that electric start on your bike. One big benefit of the KTM though is you're going to get a Brembo clutch, which is a hydraulic clutch. I love that. And you're going to get a Brembo brake. I think they're the best brakes in the industry. Brembo on the front and rear. That's another big difference in the cost. On the Yamaha, they use Nissan brakes, and there's nothing wrong with the Nissan brakes, but I do think the Brembo brakes are better. Every time I've used them, I think they're better. And I personally think that the hydraulic clutches are better. They are self-adjusting, they don't fade. I mean, you could have clutch fade if you're wearing the thing out, but there are some extra premium components on there. Hey, real quick, please use the links for Rocky Mountain ATV down in the video description. It will get you entered to win a bike when I'm giving them away, and it keeps the lights on here at the shop. Once you click on that link for Rocky Mountain ATV, you can buy anything they sell, and it helps give a kickback to me, enters you to win this motorcycle, and keeps the lights on here in the shop. So please use those links anytime you're buying parts. Talking about price, the Yamaha is going to be significantly cheaper. It depends on which model year we're talking about, but that might be as much as $3,000 or even a touch more cheaper. So the KTMs are somewhere in this $11,000 to maybe $11,500 range, and the Yamahas, brand new, are somewhere in this $8,200 range. So that we're talking about, as much as like $3,300. Now, again, if you want to get in the cheapest thing possible, that's where that Yamaha is awesome. It's simple, it's light, it's cheap, it's got a carburetor, so it's very easy to kind of work on, and it's very easy to get into that Yamaha. So I'm super glad that we still have it. Wish Yamaha would update some things. But if you step up to the KTM, you're going to spend a bunch more money. You're going to get electric start. You're going to get like probably a bigger stator. You're going to get some other premium components that you're not getting on the Yamaha, including like a bigger fuel tank. So there are reasons for sure to get the KTM at the extra cost. That's usually the way that I've gone, but a ton of guys love the Yamahas, and for good reason. And that $3,300 is a lot of money. And so that's a big factor. Let's talk about maintenance and tuning. That's one of the big issues that you have if you're gonna be using the Yamaha, is you're gonna have to tune that carburetor. Depending on your altitude and depending on your temperature, the carburetor needs to be tuned / jetted for your density altitude. So when you're riding at elevation like I am, you're always gonna have to have the carburetor leaned out. And then if you go to a new location where you're significant, 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 feet lower, you're gonna need to adjust your carburetor. Otherwise the bike will either not run hardly at all, or you could risk seizing the motor because it's too lean. Like if I'm jetting my bikes for 8,000 feet, riding here where I am at in Utah a lot of times, I can't take that down to sea level without burning a hole in my piston if I don't rejet my carburetor on my YZ. Whereas on the KTMs where they're fuel injected, it's gonna automatically give you that adjustment so you can ride a KTM at 1,000 feet one day and 10,000 feet the next day, and it'll have less power at 10,000 feet because of the drop in that air density, but it'll still run, it'll adjust the mix. So that's something that you're always tuning with the Yamaha. As far as the other things, they're fairly similar. Like as far as just like top ends and things like that, you're gonna be doing top ends about the same amount, and chains and sprockets and all that stuff. That's basically, it won't matter if you have the Yamaha or the KTM, you're gonna be doing maintenance on them that way. So your biggest difference is on maintenance or the tunability. Now, sometimes if you've got a TPI bike, the KTM TPI bikes, you might need to tune it somewhat, but you're not tuning it as much as you need to do with the carburetor. And once you get the TPI bike running great at your altitude, it's gonna run great at any altitude. That's not the same with a carburetor. Carburetors are great, there's nothing wrong with them, but there is more tuning required. So in conclusion, there is no right or wrong on this. I think the biggest thing is what is your budget? If your budget is a little bit lower, that Yamaha is probably gonna be the one that gets you into the game. And I want you in the game, so I'm super glad we have the Yamaha. You're gonna miss electric start, you're gonna miss the 5-speed transmission, you're gonna miss the hydraulic clutch, you're gonna miss the Brembo brakes, but you're gonna get a fantastic motorcycle that's fun. You'll lose the fuel injection, but carburetor. If you get a carburetor bike tuned properly, it runs just as good, if not better, than the EFI bikes. They try to get the EFI bikes to run as good as a carburetor does when it's tuned properly. The problem is most of the time a carburetor isn't tuned properly, and you're only getting like 50 to 60 or 70 or 80% out of the capability of that motor because it isn't tuned correctly for you. But if you can get a carburetor above 90%, and you could get a carburetor 100% on any given day, then that sucker is going to be awesome. So I love both the motorcycles. I love the Yamahas. If I was going to buy a track bike, I would just go buy a Yamaha YZ250F. I know we didn't talk about 250 and 4-strokes, but Yamaha makes a fantastic motorcycle. But me, for in the enduro market, the off-road enduro market, the KTMs just generally have a little bit more value to me and for what I like to do. But it may be different for you.